Oh, there it goes. Welcome to the third installment of 3 for Iowa High School Esports, and just talking about it. So week one, we talked about well, I'm gonna need some help here. Week one, we talked about what was week one?
Just the kind of the basics of esports and how each school's kind of got started and how they're doing things.
Perfect. And then last week it was the Iowa High School Esports Association talking about how to get started and how to sign up. And today we're going to talk about machines, equipment, space that you need for gaming, what kind of equipment you're going to need, streaming and all that kind of stuff. It's been a great time. We appreciate everyone that's attended. We still might have some people come in, and if there's anyone that needs any of the links that we've had from the last couple of weeks, feel free to reach out to really any of us, either Phil or Patrick on the iTech board, any of the board members from the Iowa High School Esports Association, or Josh and I, and we'd be happy to help answer questions or lead you guys in the right direction. So with that, I kind of let Josh take over and go through a little presentation. Feel free to ask questions throughout and enjoy.
Cool. All right. I'm going to share my screen and hope this doesn't brick. Boom. The old present thing. Okay, awesome. So today we're going to talk mainly about hardware. And it's kind of like a situation that a lot of programs find themselves in is, okay, we've been told by the superintendent or the school board that we're doing esports and I found a room, but now what? And that's kind of the next steps to getting things off the ground. So we'll talk about facility building for gaming and streaming, because that's kind of if there's any existing programs in here or, people that have been doing esports for more than a year, a lot of the front half of this presentation is probably going to be just a refresher for you, confirmation that you did it right. But it's going to be primarily stuff that it's not going to be super valuable for you. So hopefully the back half of this will be more applicable to what your guys are doing with the streaming stuff. Definitely throw your questions in the chat as we go along. This is a presentation I did last week down in Georgia, and it was like right at an hour. So we're going to abbreviate things a little bit so that we have time for questions and things like that. So if I go fast on things or we don't elaborate enough, please feel free to throw a question down. We can come back to it or stop and kind of go through things more. My name's Josh. I work with Bytespeed. We're a technology company. The only real thing that matters on this screen is my contact info if you want to get in touch with me afterwards. So please feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, follow me on social media, whatever is your preferred method of communication. Feel free to do that. Would love to talk with you, afterwards if we don't get to all your questions. So everybody's seen the awesome pictures of, esports labs from across the state, high school, college, everything in between. This is the arena that I helped to build, or the facility that I helped build at the University of Jamestown. We're a small private liberal arts college up in Jamestown, North Dakota. Was a Bytespeed customer. And this is one of the glamour shots that we were able to kind of take of our facility. And this, I think, is like the stereotypical idea of what you think of when you're kind of building out your space for your students. We want to get to this picture, but there's a lot of questions and a lot of steps along the way, a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself before we can go from like an empty room to, a facility like this. And the first question is, 100% is why? Why are we doing this? What are we doing at the school that is our main reason for starting a program? And there's a ton of reasons why schools have done this. And we've talked about it in previous webinars, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. But really, student engagement and expanding opportunities to participate for your students at your school, that's like by far and large the most common reason why high schools and middle schools will start programs. You're going to have your athletes that are going to do sports throughout the year. They're going to do football and baseball and basketball and everything in between. You're going to have your fine arts kids on the other side that are going to do band and choir and theater and all those other great things. But esports offers something for those students kind of in the middle. The students who might not have had something really tying them to the school giving them a reason to really care about their education, care about going to school, and giving those students an opportunity to participate is a huge thing. And it lends itself to a ton of other, benefits like, better retention, better, social and emotional growth, better grades, better attendance. The list goes on and on and on. But there's a ton of great reasons to why you want to build out an esports program. And the important thing here is that the schools who don't have a concrete reason of why they're going to build a program, why they're going to build a facility, those schools often struggle with implementation. They often struggle with, long-term success of their teams. And I know, part of joining the Iowa High School League is having a lot of these things in place and making sure you're talking to the right people and having that goal in place. And that's why those schools have been so successful. And it's something that I would highly encourage you to talk about before we even get to hardware. So have a reason why. Second question is where, where in the school are we going to put this thing? And there's a couple of different kind of needs of a space that play into that. Bytespeed, we've helped schools from across the country get labs up and running. And I've seen it everywhere from, the cafeteria to the media center to the library, empty classrooms that are used for other things. At the end of the day, you as a school can find the best space that fits your needs and essentially make it your own. A couple of things that you're going to definitely want to plan out, though, or kind of consider when you're choosing the place in the school to put your facility. For sure, square footage and capacity, that's number one. How many, stations can we fit in this room? How many students are going to be able to be in the room at one time? The average setup, and I'll use that term, throughout the presentation. And what I mean by setup is, desk with a PC, monitor, all the peripherals, all the other good stuff. Your typical setup is around 4 feet wide. So if you're kind of thinking of, okay, we're going to put stations around like the outside wall of a room, or we're going to put, kind of like the picture here, we're going to put kind of alternating, rows with some space in between. You want to look at about 4 feet wide when you're kind of planning out how many stations you can fit in a space. Accessibility is a big thing. We're all educators on the call, so you guys know the challenges that go with a diverse population of students and their needs. The cool thing about esports is it's available and open to students with disabilities participating. So if you have kids in wheelchairs that are going to come in and play, or have other needs like that, you want to make sure that your space is accommodating to those kids, because this is something that they're going to want to be involved with and that they can be involved with, which might be a first for them. Power and internet, if you work in IT, this is kind of preaching to the choir, but you want to make sure that you're not overloading circuits and you have the appropriate number of connectors, throughout the room that you can actually plug your machines into, monitors into. You don't want to, throw a breaker and have to reset the power on half of a building because you plug too many machines into one outlet. Internet, definitely you want to go for a wired connection instead of playing on Wi-Fi. That's going to be something super important, and we'll talk about infrastructure here in a second. But, do you have enough, drops in the room to be able to connect your machines to? Is that something that we're going to need to bring over to this room because it's just had, like an access point for wireless previously? Those are things to think about. HVAC and lighting, just kind of making sure that you have a room that can be temperature controlled or somewhat controlled. As somebody who built a esports lab in a room in North Dakota that didn't have heat in the wintertime, that was a nightmare for the first year. And then, in the summertime when our AC wasn't working, all those bodies in that room, definitely added to just the comfort level. Nowadays, PCs don't throw as much heat as they used to, so it's not as big of a conversation, but just, for the amount of bodies that are going to be in the room, making sure everybody's comfortable, making sure that, we're not pushing it to the extremes. definitely things to bring up and talk to your facilities people about. And then finally, like, will this be a multi-purpose space? A lot of programs, whether it's high school or college, will use other programs at the school, curriculum-based stuff, to help split the cost of adding machines to, their school. You might be writing a grant for, career and tech ed, and you're using Carl Perkins funds to help buy machines for that academic, use case in your school. But then, at the end of the day, at 3 o'clock or 3:30, whenever school's done, these computers have the GPU requirements, the RAM, the processor, all those different check boxes of, a machine that's going to be able to run esports titles. But you're going to have 2 uses throughout the day. So you want to make sure that whatever space you're in can accommodate all those different use cases. And this could be, anything from, robotics to career and tech exploration to Adobe and engineering and all those other types of things. But you want to be cognizant of, are you sharing this space with another teacher, with another group of students, and what are their needs, and can we make sure that everybody's happy? So that's kind of like your very basic checklist of things when you're kind of picking a space in the school. And like I said, that could be anything from a classroom to a media center in the library to, adding an addition to a building or a shop or something like that. There's not a right or a wrong answer, as long as it fits the needs of your students and your school, and you can kind of make sure that these boxes are checked. Next up is what, and this is, obviously a big question of like, what goes into an esports setup or into a space. And I want you to really think about needs versus wants, and be mindful of your budget and what do we have versus what do we need? Can we reuse things? Think of the analogy, a Ferrari is cool, but will a Camry do? And that might seem a little counterintuitive coming from a vendor who wants to sell stuff, but you don't need to, bet the farm on esports machines to get you up and running and to get you started. Obviously use case is going to come into a big play here. Are you doing more than just gaming on these machines? But, generally your equipment level can be lower and can be more entry level, give you an awesome experience, and, not break the bank. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but just kind of remember, what do I need versus, what do I want? And then finally, like, what are the priorities of my equipment? First and foremost, we have to talk about infrastructure, because it's a digital sport that we're playing. I need an internet connection to be able to play this game against, the school down the road or the school across the state. So we need to make sure that our infrastructure stuff is taken care of before we even talk about the hardware that we're going to play on. After that, PCs, and I really should have consoles here, especially for Iowa, because you guys do so much on the Switch. Those 2 devices, what we're actually playing on. Next up, peripherals, keyboard, mouse, monitor, headset, all the accessories that go along with the PC. And then finally, furniture and decor, and kind of rounding out the space. So first and foremost, let's talk about infrastructure real quick. And what does your connection look like? Like I mentioned, you definitely want to avoid Wi-Fi if at all possible. It's just going to give you on a wired connection, you're going to have a more stable connection. Chances are your bandwidth and what you're running on will work better wired over Wi-Fi. There's just less things that can go wrong. But chances are the connection and the broadband that you have at the school is going to be enough to get you by without really having to overhaul things, or like, oh my gosh, I have to take this from, a 500 gig connection to like 3 gigs of internet or something crazy like that. The good thing to remind yourself of is that, during the day, yes, we have a ton of devices that are connected and walking around the school. You might be one-to-one and every student has a Chromebook, or your business office might be doing a bunch of stuff. Employees have their computers logged in. You've got teachers that are presenting and using the internet for all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, when esports practice happens, all those devices are generally turned off or not even in the building. So your network traffic is going to go, from maxed out down to, just a few devices. So that oftentimes is going to be enough for your students to have a good experience playing in esports, as long as they have that wired connectivity. If it is something that you need to address and maybe add some more bandwidth, that's something that I would encourage you to look at for like year 2 or year 3, maybe when you're not buying devices, not paying for other things, and you can kind of address that as you go. A separate network, is that an option? A lot of schools will create like a separate VLAN for their, esports computers to live on, a separate, connection altogether from the rest of school, so that, you can make that network that the esports stuff lives on a little bit more personalized to the use case. From a management standpoint, you're going to have different firewall requirements that you're going to need to open up ports for, allow access for, Steam or the League of Legends launcher or Blizzard launcher, or, the list goes on and on and on, Nintendo Online, etc. Those firewall requirements are going to be vastly different than what you want, like Computer Lab 1 to be able to do during the day for curriculum and when students are actually in class. So, if you can create a separate entity, a separate network for your esports machines to live on, that's going to help you just kind of from a management standpoint. And it's also going to separate things from the rest of the school, to where if, okay, I have to run a download on machines in this engineering lab, we're not going to suck up all the bandwidth for, my 5 esports machines that we have a game at 4 o'clock. So things to consider there. Already kind of talked about the rest of these things. The last real quick thing to talk about as far as infrastructure is updates. These titles will have updates every week or every couple of weeks, once a season. Everything is going to be dependent on the game, but how you manage those updates is going to be really important. We talked about it a little bit last week, with, making sure that you're doing updates during off hours or the day before a game, so that, when we sit down and we have like a Rainbow Six game and I've got my 5 players, they're ready to rock and roll, we can actually start the game and play it at 4 o'clock, as opposed to starting the game up, 15 minutes before we're supposed to play. And then, oh my gosh, I've got a 12 gig download that I have to do for each machine, so that the game is up to date and we can actually play it. There are a number of different ways to manage these updates, to do them, during the night or during off hours, or schedule them to happen remotely. There are some schools that will do, things like a game cache server, to where you're downloading it once to a server and then pushing and copying files over to the machines instead of downloading them every single time. But it's something that you as a tech department or as an esports coach will have to kind of think about what works best for you, and highly encourage you to talk to the other schools around you, other schools that have similar broadband, similar network. I know those terms are not, mutually exclusive, but similar, networks to yours, and kind of seeing how they're doing it, what challenges that they're seeing, and kind of make sure that you're keeping in mind that that's something that you're going to have to do. I see there's a couple of different things in the chat here. Let's see. Ryan brings up the fact that we have Discord app blocked across our network, except for my esports lab. Does anybody else block that app, or, have things exempt from esports time? I think that's really going to be a personal, question based on the school. Last week we talked about blocking Discord, and a lot of schools have different policies. It's just, comes down to what your IT department's comfortable with, what your administration's comfortable with, and just making sure that you have like a close eye on what those students are accessing, because Discord's open to, much more than just your school server. Patrick, Phil, anybody else want to talk about Discord real quick before we get going?
That's just something we don't block in our district. I know we kind of talked a little bit about it, but that may go down to your district and how they feel about any communication app. But it's a useful tool for us, and so we don't want to try to limit it and try messing around with that when we know we're going to be using on the esports machines. And actually, just having Discord app with our esports students gives our way to communicate and get connected.
For sure.
Yeah, same with us. There is, I think, an age restriction for Discord. So we do follow that policy. I think it was 12 or 13. Can't remember right offhand, but wherever that is where we will block below that age group. So
awesome. Great. For some games, like, that in-game chat or just the ability to actually talk to your teammates, it's super important. Not every game has that internally. But I know, like, for some games, you have to join like team chat in Overwatch, if you don't have a third-party app like Discord running in the background. So you can still, use like some titles in-game chat to be able to talk. But Discord is definitely super common. There's a ton of schools that use it. And it's just kind of comes down to, how you're going to allow your students in your school to use that software. Moving on from infrastructure, let's talk about computers. The big question that we get very often is, how many do I need? And this really comes down to, a couple of different things. Number one is, what titles are you playing? For Overwatch, the minimum roster that I absolutely need to be able to play the game is 6-on-6. So we need 6 computers to be able to play Overwatch. Games like League of Legends, Rainbow Six Siege, a bunch of the other team titles are usually 5-on-5. And then, Rocket League, your smallest title, is 3-on-3. So what a lot of schools will do is, what's the minimum number of devices I need to have to field a roster? And then let's double that. So, and that would be to be able to run inter squad practices, be able to say, okay, Phil's my team captain, and then Patrick's my JV team captain, and those two teams are going to play against each other in practice, and that's how we're going to run our scrimmages for the day. So I might have 5-on-5 practice for League of Legends, 6-on-6 for Overwatch, etc. So that's kind of like what the bare minimum would be. I think a lot of schools, especially in the K-12 world, will start kind of between 5 and 15 machines. That's just kind of from the Bytespeed side of seeing what other people are doing, across the state, across the country, is they're getting the minimum number of devices to play the game, and then usually adding, a second set of 5 or a third set of 5 to be able to have more teams running at the same time. Yeah, and that's important because we're limited to the number of spots on a team and the number of people that can participate. So if I have a League of Legends roster and I've got my 5 starters that come in and they practice, but I have 25 other kids on the esports roster, what do I do with the rest of those students to keep them involved? That might be saying that, this group of students only practices, 2 times a week. And then we're going to alternate practice times and have, Group A practice on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Group B come in on Tuesday, Thursday. Maybe it's a before school and after school practice. Maybe it's, different times where they're in for an hour and then the next group comes in for an hour. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but if I don't have enough devices for every single student to play at one time, we need to just kind of look at our practice schedule and our game schedule to be able to say, okay, how do we keep these students engaged? And there's other things outside of just playing the game that those students can do to stay engaged, stuff like broadcasting, video editing, social media, scouting, video review, all those types of things that are awesome parts of esports as a full team perspective, but not necessarily like the 5 kids that are playing on the machines. As far as specs go, that's the other kind of big, ticket item that we need to talk about. The cool thing is that most esports titles are pretty well optimized to run on entry-level hardware. Now, I'll say that with an asterisk because, obviously there's different in-game settings that we might have to dial back to be able to run the game at, the appropriate frame rates and things like that. But, for a really long time, we used to say that, you could play League of Legends on a toaster. And that is pretty close. Entry-level hardware does a great job at running most titles and giving your students the opportunity to participate. But that's, a balancing act, because if we're talking about minimum spec requirements versus how long is that going to be viable? Is there a little bit of future proofing that we have to do? Do we want to buy hardware every year, or is this something that we're going to look at, in chunks where we're going to buy every 3 or 4 or 5 years? So there's 2 example builds that I want to talk about. Number one on the left-hand side here is what I'm going to call the Bytespeed gold standard as far as entry-level esports hardware is concerned. It's a entry level, mid-level processor. So like a i5, Ryzen 5, 16 gigs of RAM, 500 gigs of SSD storage. Really any size SSD will do. There are some games that are getting to be, pretty large file sizes, but 500 gigs is enough to at least get you started. You might want to jump that up to a terabyte or have an extra drive for more game files, especially if you're participating in, a ton of different titles throughout the year. Your GPU, a 1660 Super is still like the best bang for your buck out there. It's not going to run games at ultra settings and ray tracing and all that other stuff, but it's going to play games at a competitive frame rate, competitive settings, give you a great experience, and then, not break the bank and have to sell a kidney to be able to afford. Heat sinks and power supplies, we can say pretty standard on this. I'm going to tell you right now, liquid cooling is overrated and not worth your money, unless you're doing things like overclocking and rendering out giant files. But like the use cases for that is so small that I don't want you to ever really say that we need liquid cooling. And then, a standard 650 watt power supply, as long as it's bronze plus certified or better, you're going to be totally fine, have enough headroom to run that config, and not really have any issues with your hardware. Like I said, this is going to run most titles great. Again, we're not going to be playing on, ultra settings, but you're going to have an awesome experience with these machines, and it's going to live 3, 4, 5 years, no problem. Now, if we have budget, if we have a little bit more that we want to do with the machines, your mid-level, next step up would be, like an i7, Ryzen 5 5600, Ryzen 7, kind of in that ballpark. Again, still just 16 gigs of RAM. For gaming, RAM is like a spot where you start to see diminishing returns after 16 gigs. Really the performance difference between 16 gigs of RAM and 32 is going to be so marginal, you're not even going to notice it. So unless you're doing stuff like streaming or really heavy video editing or multitasking, really RAM, you can stick at 16, even at a mid-level config, and be totally fine. SSD storage, again, GPU, we can talk about 30 series cards, 3060, 3070. It's going to be, a couple $100 to make that jump, but you're going to be able to do a little bit more with those graphics cards. Standard heatsink, again, air cooling is totally great. And, the power supply shouldn't really need to change unless we're getting into super high-end hardware. And this kind of mid-tier machine, it's going to run Rainbow Six, it's going to run Overwatch, some of the more demanding titles at higher settings. Both are going to be, great options for your school. I will say that in a K-12 sense, and from Bytespeed standpoint, 80% of all the machines we build are in this kind of entry-level config on the left, or with like one upgrade in kind of like, maybe we're going to go from the 1660 Super, but we're going to add a 3060 instead. Or, we're going to keep this and add, an i7 because we're going to stream or something like that. Very, very common between these two configurations. Most high schools are kind of running with this hardware. Peripherals, the big thing is you want kind of like a good size screen that has a high refresh rate. So 24-inch, 144 hertz is what, again, kind of like the gold standard. Curved monitors are overrated. Don't pay for it. Don't do it. 27-inch is the other kind of size factor that we see pops up every now and again, but really 24-inch is kind of the sweet spot. That 144 hertz is going to give you the good refresh rate, good response time, and it's going to be able to keep up with, especially like those first-person shooter titles where, frames win games. So that's what you want to look for in a monitor, either HDMI or DisplayPort for your connectivity. That's the important thing there. Keyboards and mice, a mechanical keyboard and mouse is going to be more responsive. The keystroke that it takes to actually register the input, it can be customizable. It could be a light tap. It could be a hard push. They're generally more durable, within reason. And they're just built for, the faster things that we have to do for esports titles. And they're going to perform better and last longer than like your standard membrane keyboard. That's not to say that those, your basic keyboard and mouse can't work. It absolutely can. But if you have budget and you have like, you're looking for, okay, what's our next thing that we want to do? Keyboard, mouse are a great way to kind of jump in at a pretty low barrier to cost entry. You can find really great options for keyboards and mice for anywhere between kind of like, you know, 50, 60 bucks and $100. Headsets, you want something that's just over the ear. It has a microphone. It's going to help with a little bit of noise canceling. You're going to be able to use apps like Discord or the in-game chat to be able to talk to your teammates and hear the game sound. I see a lot of schools that are like, oh, we don't need headsets. You know, they sit next to each other. So they're going to be able to talk to each other and communicate that way. You're missing out on a lot, especially with games like, you know, like Rainbow Six Siege is super relevant. You know, you need to hear when the other team is approaching or where the fire is coming from. So game audio is super important, and you still need headphones to be able to really participate at the fullest level. Next up is how, you know, like this is great. We've got a big list of all the equipment we need, all of the check boxes that we need to do, but like, how in the heck do I pay for this? How do I get it? What do I do? And budgets can come from a lot of different areas at your school. You know, it could be under athletics. It could be, you know, a student life or an academic program. It could be, you know, the Department of Underwater Basket Weaving. It doesn't matter where you're pulling from. The important thing is that you have support from your school. There are a ton of resources out there. If we can't set aside, you know, dedicated budget from a certain department to pay for equipment. I've got a link on the screen here to the Bytespeed website. We've just got a big list of academic education grants listed on our website. I think it's like 60 or 70 different grant opportunities out there that, you know, you as a school can look into for funding. A lot of that goes back to that dual purpose stuff that we talked about. So, you know, Carl Perkins money for career and tech education, you know, Project Lead the Way labs, things like that, that we're writing academic grants to be able to fund curriculum-based projects. But at the end of the day, those machines have the hardware we need for esports. There's other stuff in there. Fundraising wise, you know, there's groups out there like the Varsity Esports Foundation that from time to time help, you know, schools fund their programs, and that's all they do. There's other awesome resources like eTeam Sponsor. That's a crowdfunding platform. You know, like a lot of college athletic programs and some high schools use it. You know, it's crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. They have a great example on the eTeam Sponsor website. There's a school out in California that they use eTeam Sponsor to fund their football program. And that's the only fundraising that they have to do throughout the year. So that's super great. And then I have like bake sales and raffles in there as kind of like a tongue-in-cheek joke, but also like actually a pretty viable way to fundraise. We work with a school in Illinois that this computer science teacher, Marvin, he with his, I think it was his 8th grade computer science class, they built an arcade cabinet with a Raspberry Pi during the school year, built that up, sold raffle tickets for like 20 bucks a piece. And then at the end of the year, they raffled off this arcade cabinet that they built during school as part of their in-class, you know, curriculum. And that made them like $4,000 or $5,000 for their esports team. So, you know, kind of thinking outside the box, but doing things that are relevant to your program. Great ways to make smaller chunks of money. And then finally, your sponsorship and partnership stuff. This is hard for some schools to be able to work with, you know, technology companies necessarily. Like, you know, for Bytespeed, we're handcuffed because of things like E-Rate. You know, there's other, you know, companies out there that aren't able to do sponsorships from like a nationwide level. But something that I will say is that talk to your local businesses or your booster club members or people in your community that are vested in the interest of your school. I think that's a great way to pull in small amounts of money rather than going to, you know, like Paul's Hardware down the road and asking for $50,000 to outfit your space. You know, maybe you go to Paul's Hardware and say, hey, would you consider sponsoring one station, you know, one setup? And then we'll talk to, you know, Frank's Barbershop and have him sponsor the next one. And, you know, the Duncans are a big booster club family for my school. So they're going to sponsor one station. And that way you're kind of splitting up the ask, but seeing more of a return. And it's local businesses that are really invested in your school and in your community. And I think there are a lot of, you know, opportunities for fundraising and sponsorship there. I see we have a question from Troy here. How viable would you say it is to start with a Ryzen G processor for integrated graphics and then upgrading to a discrete card later? I think that's a great question and would work for very few titles. I'm thinking like that's a great way to get started with like League of Legends. You know, a game that's not super graphically intensive and can run off of that integrated graphics, but it's really like slapping a Band-Aid on something. That's a good stopgap. Maybe you're going to start esports this year, jump into one title, use integrated graphics to kind of have a proof of concept, you know, get students involved. And then you can say at the end of the year, like, hey, we had 30 kids that wanted to play League of Legends. Now we're going to go and actually, you know, bring that info to the school board or your administration and say, we need to dedicate some funds to buy, you know, actual gaming machines, or, you know, get upgrade parts that we can use to slot in graphics cards later. So I would say it is definitely an option, but the use case is going to be pretty small. Okay. Refresher before we get into like just a real quick kind of segment on streaming and kind of what do I do after I have a setup. What is actually in my setup? We've got a PC with kind of like your standard entry-level specs. We've got some peripherals. Maybe we have some furniture, like ergonomic, adjustable furniture. Gaming furniture can go a million different ways, but the important thing to think of is, okay, do I have stuff in my school that will work already that we can kind of dual purpose? Or if I am ordering stuff, it needs to be adjustable and have support and be able to like sit in an ergonomic position. That goes for desks and chairs. There are a ton of different desks out there. I would say if you're looking at getting desks, find something that has a lot of usable space. And what I mean by that is a flat top with nothing fancy on top of it. Maybe you have some cutouts for cable management, but like just good usable space that I can set a monitor and my keyboard and mouse on, maybe the desktop if it's big enough on the side, and be able to move my arms comfortably, especially for those first-person shooter titles. You know, if I've got an arm mover instead of a wrist aim kind of style, I want to be able to move my arm, you know, the full motion without, you know, knocking into my neighbor's keyboard or you know, punching a monitor that's on the desk. And then for chairs, make sure it's just adjustable is the main thing. If you're going to be sitting there, you know, in an upright position for 2 hours playing, you want something that's going to have support and be able to kind of move so that your arms are at a 90-degree angle. You know, you're comfortable sitting there, regardless of what game or what position that you're sitting in. So that's a station, and it should, I mean, look a lot like this. Obviously, this is one of our rigs. It's a little bit more kind of aesthetically pleasing, but really we have a PC, monitor, keyboard, mouse, and headset on a flat usable desk. That's your typical esports setup. And what, you know, we can take an empty room and get to this pretty easily. Now, the big question after that is like, okay, maybe I'm a program that's been operating for a couple of years, or you know, we've got all this gear. What do we do next as far as hardware is concerned? And that's kind of like the next big question is, where do I go from here? And that would be streaming is the next easy kind of step and evolution into, you know, what you can do. And really, as far as getting into streaming, if you have that typical setup, you've got almost everything you need to go right from there. A lot of like the fancier streaming booths, and you can kind of see one of the ones that we worked on is the broadcast studio, just has some nicer microphones. Maybe it's a DSLR camera or, you know, an extra monitor, 2 PC setup maybe, and just kind of built out into a very nicely laid out room. So, you know, to do streaming, there are a couple of different things that we want to look at. And I'll go quick here because I know we're kind of getting towards the end of the session and I want to leave time for questions. But we just need to look at 3 really key areas. Number 1, can our PC actually handle streaming and playing the game at the same time? Number 2, what software is out there that we're going to use to be able to push our gameplay out to the internet so that our friends, our family, our booster club, our fans can watch. And then finally, extra accessories, streaming hardware that can kind of take a very basic setup into, something that, is a little bit more dedicated to actually content creation. So number 1, PC requirements. If you think back to that mid-level build, that'll be perfect for streaming. Processor, RAM, and video cards are like the main things that we want to look at. Going to that mid-level CPU, maybe, like I said, adding in a little bit extra RAM to handle the multitasking that we're going to be doing. And then, definitely bumping up that graphics card to like a 3060 or a 3070 to handle more video input that we're actually trying to process and pump out. Software, there's a couple of solid options, OBS Studio and Streamlabs. This is the software that's actually going to take our gameplay, pump it out to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, whatever it might be. This is just a quick look at OBS Studio. It integrates in really, really well with YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook, which are kind of like the 3 main streaming platforms. I know Facebook's kind of like a dirty word in education. So YouTube and Twitch are definitely like the top 2, but there are some schools that will stream to Facebook. And your typical OBS broadcaster, and I just pulled up Hearthstone real quick before the webinar today to kind of showcase what this might look like. You've got really simple controls. It's not anything flashy, but it's really, I would say, straightforward. You've got on the bottom right-hand side, you have your start streaming button, start recording. You can start a virtual camera or do, mess with settings and things. In the middle bottom of the screen, you've got an audio mixer that you can, mute certain microphones or adjust the volume of the gameplay or your actual volume for your mic. And then right next to it, you've got sources and scenes where you can add extra hardware, pull in, like a text score, like I have up in the top right, and just kind of really start to layer in what you see on screen. I like Streamlabs a little bit better because it's a lot more user-friendly for newbies. It's got some great tutorials. It kind of walks you through getting started straight from the setup. Both of these softwares are totally viable. They're both free. So that's great. But I like Streamlabs a little bit more because it's, like I said, a little bit more new user-friendly. Excuse me. The very first thing it's going to ask you to do when you boot up Streamlabs is to connect your platform of choice. So you can before we even start adding cameras and all these other things, it's going to ask you to log into Twitch or YouTube or Facebook and get that connection started right off the bat. So when you click start streaming, it's already got your stuff ready to go. So that's the first thing that happens when you boot up this platform. Next up, you can set up your mic and webcam. It's got easy drop-down menus that you can pick from. So, you can pick your USB, webcam, your USB microphone, and you can set those up again before we even get into actually, putting gameplay on the screen. You also get free themes with Streamlabs. This has been something in the past. They've got a lot more options now. And I can already, before we even get going, I can have kind of like your basic webcam frame, some visual effects on screen that, we didn't have to make in Photoshop and import over or, worry about, is it the correct size or does it do the animation that I want it to do? You can pick a free theme right off the bat and have like some assets in your stream already ready to go. Again, before we even start adding gameplay. And then, this is a very similar dashboard to what we saw with OBS Studio. It's got the mixer in the bottom right, your sources tab in the middle, and then, your scenes and other things on the bottom left-hand side. And the top bar of this is going to be like your stream preview. So to like add different sources, we just click the plus sign in the sources box and it'll show you, okay, image, display capture, game capture, webcam, all these different things that we want to add. So you can go in and find your webcam, place it in there. You can find your gameplay, put that in there and layer it kind of like you're almost like layering a PowerPoint. moving things on top of each other so that my webcam is underneath the webcam frame, but on top of the actual gameplay. It's very, very user-friendly from getting up and going. And again, it integrates in really well with Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. And then lastly, real quick here, we'll talk about extra accessories. These are by no means required to get streaming, but it's kind of like you can go from your real basic setup to something that looks really, really professional just by adding a couple of different things. Cameras is definitely the first part of it. You could stream without a webcam on, but if you're going to have commentary going, or you want to give a face to your casters that are actually talking to the audience and doing that like ESPN style broadcast, a webcam is a really cheap way to get that started and add a lot to your overall broadcast. On the low end, or kind of the entry level end, you can go with like a Logitech webcam. Super easy to set up. You just connect the USB. There's a lot of different options with varying quality. And I think they're pretty cost effective overall. The webcam I'm using right now for this webinar is the one that I stream with at home personally. And it's this top Logitech camera right here. It streams at like 720p. It was $30 and it's super easy to use. On the high end side of this, you could connect like a DSLR camera. It's going to require a couple extra things, a capture card to, grab that video through an HDMI cable. They're definitely more expensive, but your image quality is going to be better, and you have a little bit more, customization, more things that you can actually do with that camera. Lighting is definitely a big one. If I pull up to my little $20 ring light that I have above my machine and I turn that on and I brighten up my face, that's going to add a lot actually to your broadcast as well. Things like a ring light that will sit right next to your webcam. Key lights like the bottom left here, that'll add lighting, into dark spots that your ring light focused on somebody's face might look. Those will fill in shadows really nicely. And then like light strips, like LED light strips that you can get at the hardware store for like $10. Change the color, add accent lighting, kind of like Tanner's got. I don't know if you guys can see him right now, but he's got LED lights behind his big cutout of Minnesota. It just adds some real cool customization that you can add in the form of light and color to your broadcast and make it really kind of stand out. Microphones, USB connection, again, kind of on the left-hand side, your entry-level stuff. Easy to connect. Quality can vary greatly, so make sure you're paying attention to that. I'm actually using the SoloCast right now. It's a super easy USB, plug into my desktop. Much better audio quality than like a headset microphone. Still not as good as like an XLR mic or something that requires an audio mixer and a little bit of extra hardware to get going. XLR mics can be extremely expensive. And I would say like that's what your professional streamers would be looking at, on their broadcasts. Audio quality is something that is definitely an important part of your broadcast. If it sounds good and looks good, that's kind of like the complete package. Capture cards are kind of like the other real quick thing that is super important, especially, I know Iowa's doing their Super Smash Brothers playoffs right now. So if you want to stream from a Nintendo Switch that's a console apart from your PC and you're not actually running gameplay on the computer, a capture card is the only way that we're going to be able to get that video from the console to, something like Twitch or YouTube. And that's going to be a real simple deal, a capture card, either internal connected directly to the motherboard or external, which is be like a USB powered alongside your PC. You're going to take an HDMI cable from the console, connect it to the capture card, which connects into, your graphics card or your motherboard on your PC. And that's just going to let us get more video or more different sources of video and sound to your actual streaming machine. So this would be, if you're running multiple webcams or if you're running a multiple PC streaming setup. Like I have 3 different Rocket League players. Their PCs are all connected to external capture cards, which feed into one streaming PC. And I'm pulling in a ton of different video. Capture cards are really the best way, and not necessarily the only way to make that happen. But it's definitely, you know, if you're thinking high-end broadcast, that's what a capture card is really going to come in and fill that role. I would say like your external capture cards are really great. They can run anywhere from, you know, $50, $60, $70 all the way up to, I think the internal ones are running right around like $150. And then last thing I'm going to talk about is a Stream Deck. This is another thing that is definitely not needed to broadcast, but can offer a ton of cool customization and personalization to what you're doing for streaming. Really what this Stream Deck is a bunch of programmable buttons that will bring up different lighting effects or different audio cues, or they're going to switch camera perspectives. It's really doing a lot of the work that, you know, something that you would do in OBS Studio or Streamlabs OBS is doing, you know, selecting scenes or adding effects and things like that. But it's from the touch of a button on something that you can just press when you're streaming. And it'll work with external hardware as well in certain circumstances. So if you've got like Elgato ring lights that are a certain color and you want to change things to, like, maybe you scored a goal in Rocket League and you want to flash the school colors, that's a program button that you can set on a Stream Deck for when you score. You can hit that button and the lights will change. Just really cool, personalized, customized things that you can do to kind of take your broadcast from more of like a basic entry-level thing to more of a high-end broadcast. Definitely not needed, but a cool addition. And then you can have a setup that looks like this, you know, with all the bells and whistles that, you know, we're really taking just like a normal setup to, you know, a broadcaster setup. This is definitely overkill and not what I think your typical high school broadcast looks like. But it's something that you can look at and strive for and really accomplish with just a couple of different things. You know, really, we've got a PC that we're running things off of, a mic, a Stream Deck, some lighting, and a camera. And that's, you know, your typical accessories to go from, you know, broadcasting just gameplay to a full production. That was a lot, and I'm sure there's questions. So if you want to drop them in now or have anything that we didn't talk about or briefly scanned over, please feel free to bring those up now, and we can definitely talk about them. I think we've got about 8 minutes left.
Josh, who will you be giving away that last setup to?
To be determined.
Sad thing is, it doesn't look that different than my setup at home from when I'm teaching at Iowa State online.
There you go. Yeah.
So yep. Patrick's out. He already has one.
Yeah.
So that leaves Phil, I guess, right?
There you go.
There you go.
So one thing I thought I'd show real quick, just our setup. I got a nice picture of what our setup kind of looks like. You know, it feeds right into the conversation. Because, you know, we use the space that we had, and we had the Gravity gaming laptops, which we went with because we didn't know about our space. That's one reason we have a gaming laptop versus the desktops. And you can see that we just have monitors here. We have keyboards and mice. We have a nice space for our main 6. And then the other half of the room is another 6 setups. So you're seeing half of the space here. So that's kind of what we're working with. And of course, we were able to find nice purple gaming chairs for cheap on Amazon. But, you know, we spent our money on the gaming laptops. We have decent monitors. You know, they only go up 74 hertz. That 144 hertz is really that key point I think I'd like to get to in the future. There we go.
Yeah. I think, Patrick, you showing that is a great thing because we even talked about like mobile versus desktop. You can make both work extremely viable either way. It's really going to be kind of based on, you know, do you have room for desktops to just sit there and not have to tear down or move them? Some of the multi-purpose spaces, you know, I have to be mobile, so we need laptops. A couple of years ago, I would have said, stay away from mobile, don't do it. But the technology has come a really long ways in the last couple of years, and it's a super viable way to do things. I see.
We have no issue at all with running Overwatch or anything on those.
Awesome. I do see a question here from Allie. What would a room cost? So the number that I like to throw out and kind of use as like a ballpark getting started figure is about $2,000 per station. And that would be PC plus the peripherals. So your keyboard, your mouse, your headset, your monitor, the desktop, kind of all into one package. if you think about $2,000, that should cover you no problem. Now, specs of the machines, if you go a little bit higher, go to that mid-level config. Now we might be talking closer to like 2,500 for the whole thing included. But like 2,000 is a really good kind of ballpark figure to start with. And it's really digestible. And you know, to say, okay, if we're going to plan for 10 machines, 20 grand should get us there. Any other questions? Would a Switch environment be a lot cheaper as a starting point? It would. The thing with Nintendo Switch, it's a $300 console, I believe. And then you're going to have, you know, controllers and things that you're going to need to support it. I will say that with console stuff, your titles that you're going to be able to participate in is going to be a lot smaller, but it is a great kind of like, hey, we're going to start with Super Smash Brothers this year, get a Switch, play that way, and then look and say, okay, we've got all these kids that want to do the other, you know, titles that I was offering. Then we look into a PC lab.
Only thing I'd add with the Nintendo Switch is, you definitely need to get the $300 Switch. You can't get the Switch Lite because you need output to a TV. And then we actually use different streaming rigs for our Switch than we do for Overwatch and that, because it's a lot easier with the Switch, since we just need that HDMI signal in from the Switch, and we use the little HDMI splitter. That's all we use. It's a cheap little box, and then input it into our device. Make sure you get a lot of controllers with that, because kids will go through the controllers.
Absolutely.
We did get another question from Mark. You gave entry-level and mid-level specs. What would a high-end specs look like? We didn't really talk about this, but all of our machines are custom built to order. So although Josh kind of gave like a typical build, if you wanted to adjust one component versus another, we can do that easily. The highest level that we've built for Iowa specifically, some of my schools in Kentucky will get really competitive and they want to have the best machines in the state. But the highest one's kind of like an i7 2070 level graphics card. That's about what some of the higher end schools in the state of Iowa are doing. But I mean, Josh, if you want to speak to the highest end we can build at the moment, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, on high end, we're talking like i9, Ryzen 9, 5900X, 32 gigs of RAM, couple of terabyte solid states, 3070, 3080 graphics, 850 watt power supply. The list goes on and on and on. That's going to be overkill for just about everything you're going to do for esports. The real like cool use case that I could see with a machine like that is if you're doing some really high level broadcasting or video editing that you want to do a ton of stuff at once off of one machine. But for just esports and for playing and participating that way, like a machine that high end is going to be overkill and not worth your dollars. I would rather add another station for that money instead of, going with a higher spec line. Really anything, based on what your budget is, like Tanner said, we can kind of customize and work with you on what the ideal configuration would be. But I would say like the average or kind of what most schools are doing is in that entry to mid-level kind of spec. There are a couple of schools that have gone, totally into the high-end world, but it's just going to be overkill. And what you're using those machines for really has to be like really high-end use cases before it's worth the money.
We have done a few builds as of late. A lot of schools like to build their own machines or want their students to build their own machines. All of our custom built or all of our total builds come with a 5-year warranty. And then if we do like a custom build where we send you parts, we can't warranty the parts just because so many components can break. We're happy to help out with that process. And it is something that's great. If you have a teacher that really knows a lot about building PCs and all that kind of stuff, we do have the ability to help walk you through that. And we do have some schools in the state that have done that already. So if it's something that you wanted to do for a computer building class, it is something that we can take a look at as well.
Hey, Josh and Tanner, I'd just like to remind everybody about the iTech conference as well. That's April 13th and 14th, and registration opens soon on that. I'm hoping both Josh and Tanner are going to be there to answer your questions in person. We're hoping to have a setup of computers so we can do a tournament style play so everyone can see how those machines look, and some furniture possibly too as well. I'm hoping that Josh might be doing a full session on shoutcasting just to help me out.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can be there, we'll definitely put something together.
Awesome. And then Iowa Esports Association will also be available there as well. We have rooms dedicated for esports sessions, and I hope you guys can all attend that. And I want to thank you guys. Thank you to Gravity Gaming's Bytespeed and Iowa High School Esports Association for help putting this on.
Yeah, no problem. Our pleasure. Mark just asked if we can post the links for the other recordings. Everything is saved on the Bytespeed YouTube channel. So if you search Bytespeed MN, Bytespeed Minnesota in YouTube, it should pop up, and there should be some of the most recent videos that we have on the channel. So they're recorded in full, put up on there. We're never going to take them down. We're never going to, paywall them that you have to, pay something to watch the recording. It'll be right there. And I think Tanner even just linked it. So should be, and then this recording too today will get added probably tomorrow at some point. It's usually about 24 hours afterwards. We've got it exported from Zoom and uploaded and things like that. So, and I think Tanner's been sending out the recordings when we have them to everybody that registered for the webinar. So if you're in today, you should get the recording in your email. All right. Awesome. Any other questions from anybody or final thoughts? I just want to say thanks to Phil and Patrick and everybody in Iowa that's been kind of organizing these things and letting us play a small part. It's been fun, and we've got a lot of great people down in the state leading the charge for esports forward. So thanks for everything that you guys do.
And we will have more information always come out later. If we have a lot of need for more of these sessions, we have time between now and April. But yeah, and nice thing is I think we have a lot of schools doing esports, and if you guys get the equipment there, the kids will show up. But make sure you have the kids' interest first.
Absolutely. All right.
Right.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll be able to sign off. Thanks again for joining us today and in weeks past. And everybody have a good, I guess Thanksgiving break is right around the corner. So have a good rest of your semester, and we'll see everybody soon.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.